charity, which at the moment is doing incredible work, championing journalism and supporting journalists who need a bit of help. These are unprecedented times. I know the number of inquiries to the charity has gone up, and they are there to provide support for you, both financially and otherwise. So have a look at the website for more details on what the journalist charity can do for you. One thing is offer you some free advice tonight. And you are going to hear from some panelists who are worth, well, in tonight's terms, in consultancy terms, thousands of pounds, and it's all FOC for you. I'll introduce them in just a moment, but first a word about myself. My name is Frances Finn. I've been working for the BBC as staff for more than 20 years now as a journalist, mostly as a radio presenter. But in 2014, I made a leap away from full-time into just a couple of days for the Beeb. And since then, I've been exploring what else is out there as a freelancer. And I can honestly say it was the right decision. I do not regret it. I think I've had a bigger life, a richer life as a result. Richer, not monetarily, sadly, but definitely experientially. And tonight is all about giving you some hope and some practical advice. You might be someone thinking, shall I go freelance? You might already be a freelancer. You might be someone who's been freelancing a long time and you're thinking, this pool I'm fishing in right now seems like it's drying up. Do not fear, because we have three very experienced people to hand. Let me introduce them to you. We've got Susan Grossman, who is an ex-BBC journalist and broadcaster. She's a magazine editor, writing coach. She's a visiting lecturer at a number of academic institutions, an MA lecturer, for instance, at Westminster University. And Susan specialises in helping freelancers progress. So she's going to be invaluable tonight. David Thomas. David is also an ex-BBC staff member, journalist, head of department. He went on to set up his own training business, and he can get you more organised, he says, away from the paperwork and more into developing your business, your financial skills, more time to do the things that you're good at, and he can help with your networking as well. And finally, Matt Udell has also emerged from the BBC cocoon as a beautiful PR butterfly. He has done lots of TV. He's been a station editor for the BBC and local radio. Now he runs his own PR agency. So we'll come to some of your questions in a moment. The way it will work is I'm going to read some of them out that were submitted before tonight. But as you think of stuff, as you hear what's being said and you think, I want to know a bit more about that perhaps, do write your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can. So let me just ask a few questions of our panel just to get the ball rolling. Let me start with Susan. Susan, we've said these are difficult times. That's why we're calling tonight the future of freelancing, finding work after COVID, during COVID, really. Who knows how this is how long it's going to last. Susan, just summarise the landscape at the moment of freelance journalism. How do you see it?
Right. I see it as probably most of you who are tuning in at this moment see it, that it has changed, that things are not like they were. It's much more difficult to get work. But although the system has changed in as much as there are magazines that aren't around anymore, you haven't changed. In other words, you're here, you've been freelance, you qualify as a journalist in as much as you've probably been published and you've done all sorts of different things. So we're weathering the storm at the moment, and you have a choice. You can upskill while you're weathering that storm, or you can use all the skills that you know that you've got, that you've used in the past, and just think of other ways of using the things you're good at, whether it's interviewing or collecting data or writing on health or whatever else it is. Now is the time to actually be proactive and reactive to things out there. So there are opportunities. They're not the same. There is a storm, but you've got the options to decide what to do during this absolutely awful time for everybody.
Let me ask Matt a question. Matt, I mentioned that you took the leap into a world away from the BBC. Describe that experience for you, because there might be some now that have just suddenly found themselves without a staff post, or they're thinking of getting into working for themselves. Matt, describe the experience for you. Was it painful? Was it easy? Tell me more.
Yeah, well, I actually left the BBC to go and work in the NHS as a director of communications at a local level, and that was fine. So it was one salary job into another. Unfortunately for me, the NHS reforms hit in 2011 after I'd been in the NHS only about 2.5 years. So suddenly I was redundant. So interestingly, the move that I then made into, first of all, freelancing and then consultancy and finally developing my own business was an involuntary one to begin with. And therefore it was quite scary. Um, I think if you're making a conscious decision to move away, maybe after as a result of redundancy, in which case you might have a bit of money behind you, or even if you're just consciously deciding to go and do something else, it can feel a bit better because you're more in control of it. I wasn't, and the first year, I'll be honest, was quite terrifying. You have to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. You have to develop all those skills of being self-employed. You have to think about marketing yourself as well as doing the work that brings in income. So it's a decision that you have to think through. And I can guarantee that people who make that first leap into freelancing, there'll be at least one thing you haven't thought of.
Thanks, Matt. That's great to know. We'll come into some of the details and the hows in a moment. David, you in your training business, you will be spotting where people could be doing better. That's a business you've made for yourself. So, what is the one thing that you think is holding freelance journalists back?
I think the thing when people go freelance, particularly if they've been employed before, and I know that at the moment quite a lot of people are moving from employment to self-employment. One of the things I notice is that they worry about some of the practical stuff, but they don't stop and think about the really important things. And one of the most important things is to think a bit like a business. Matt's already alluded to this. The thing is that you've got to do a lot of different things, but approach that in a business-like kind of way. And too many people that I meet actually think of themselves as a journalist, and they have a job title as journalist, they're employed as a journalist, and they see that what's going to change is just the mechanism, perhaps, of earning money. That everything else will be roughly the same because they're the same. If they think of themselves with a sort of an employment kind of mindset. So one of the things that I'm always encouraging people to do is to sit back and think, okay, if you were seeing yourself as a one-person business, then how would you organize yourself? And one of the first things you do is you try and differentiate yourself from other people. Any business has to, in some way, stand out. And freelancers need to be able to stand out in people's minds. Otherwise, people won't remember you, but they won't be able to place you in their mind when you can help them. So the first step for me is always thinking about, well, first of all, get to know who you are in terms of the range of skills you've got. And then think from that point on, okay, do I understand what I've got? Does it differentiate itself from other people? And how can I then get in front of the people whom I might be able to help? So it's that mindset thing. And a lot of people come up through my courses and say, well, could you tell me how tax works? And of course we do that, but actually that's easy. Doing tax is really easy once you've been told how to do it. The difficult bit is just focusing and getting organized around who are you, what have you got, and what would other people benefit from if you worked with them.
Thanks, David. So let's go into some of your questions that were submitted before this evening, and I think Caroline Horton's is a good one to start. It kind of relates to the landscape that we're in right now, the climate. Claire says, I'm interested in those who currently have a staff job but feel vulnerable because of this economic climate. What are the prospects for those starting out as a freelancer now? Or should we just forget about working in the media altogether? Susan, can you start with this one? Are there any prospects? Is now a crazy time to start being a freelance journalist?
I don't think it's a bad time to start being a freelance journalist because there are still plenty of people who need good quality, well-researched words. The difference is that the people you're working for might be different to those that you were working for 5 years ago. But if you're starting off now, you've got a landscape where you have so many different options, not just magazines and newspapers, online or in print, and although a lot of freelancers and journalists sort of sneer a bit at the words branded content, basically that's words. And if you're an authority or knowledgeable about a certain subject, there's no reason why you shouldn't be approaching organizations and companies, whether they're NGOs, charities, anything really that you've got an interest in, and offering your services or looking on their website and seeing what they need and literally ringing them and saying, this is what I can do for you. And so there'll be a lot of freelancers listening who have probably most of their time had people approach them. And so they've just done the work that's come their way. The difference now, and it doesn't matter if you're a new freelancer or an old one, is that you've got to start being proactive yourself, and not just answer ads or wait for the phone.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I suppose when we say the word journalism, it covers a broad area of sectors, doesn't it? I mean, how would you describe journalism? What does journalism come in handy for, Susan? Can you help for some of us that are a bit blinkered in what we think journalism is?
Journalism is about informing people about things they don't know about. It's about exploring topics, making them easier for consumers to understand. It's about communicating messages, whether it's the CEO of a company or whether it's a sort of small charity. So when you are a journalist, you're the key to the door for the people who want to put their message across to as many people as possible. And it could be a clinical trial in medical terms. It could be, a new way of saving. There's so many different topics. But if you can understand what's going on and you can share that with your reader, then you're going to be in demand. But a lot of editors don't know you're out there. So that's the secret, is to sort of search for organizations and newspapers and magazines, special projects. All the publications have special projects units now. And they also have what's this branded content word, which is like the Telegraph has a section called Spark, like the Guardian has Guardian Labs. This still involves using your journalism skills and writing with integrity. You're not going to sell your soul, but you are going to find a bigger market.
Alistair's posted a little retort to that. Alistair's one of the people on this call saying this isn't journalism, that's marketing and PR. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not journalism. Would you agree?
I totally disagree. Because, I've edited 3 customer magazines over the years of doing lots and lots of different things. Journalism is what you bring to the work that you're doing. You can just be a marketeer or write content, but that's not what most branded content want. They want people who can stand back and communicate a topic, whether the topic actually is about a particular section of the marketplace is a different matter, but journalism and marketing are not the same. And it's actually more difficult to be a good content writer or branded content writer than it is to be a journalist, because your skill is to reach very specific people, not just to sell the messages that the advertisers would sell them, but to use your skills to put over messages and to create content that is as informative and as discerning as it would be in a newspaper or a magazine, but you just got different employers. Don't tell me that your employers on a newspaper or a magazine aren't independent. There's a bias everywhere. So it doesn't really matter who's paying the money, as long as you bring to it your integrity and you believe you're communicating something important. That's all that's important. And I totally disagree with the comment that branded content is just marketing.
Matt Udall, you're a good one to bring your thoughts to bear on this. You're a trained and very experienced journalist who now runs a PR and marketing business. Where's the overlap?
There's massive overlap. There is. And I get the point that Alistair's trying to make. But this is about understanding the skill set you have as a journalist. So yes, I'm a journalist by background, and we all know that when you've been a journalist, it hardwires your brain. You think in a certain way, you can spot the angles on a story, you can you know where to go to build a story, to how to take it to the next level through contacts, etc. These are all transferable skills for PR. My biggest problem as someone running my own agency, albeit quite a small one, is actually finding people who can really write. It is a really rare skill, and there are not many. There are plenty of freelance copywriters out there, and I hope none of them are on this call, but in my experience, most of them are not very good, and they charge the absolute earth. So one of the things I would say to people who are thinking about a freelance career is, don't pigeonhole yourself, don't restrict your opportunity. I'm going to be a purist, I'm only going to do independent journalism. We've recently had to write a whole series of articles for a regional house builder for use online and in print. And it was really interesting piece of journalism. We had to explain actually why now was probably the absolute, in unprecedented terms, the right time to buy a house. And there are all sorts of reasons why that's the case. But it was just, we approached it just like we would have done any old-fashioned journalistic project. We researched it, we talked to people, we wrote the copy, and it was published. The fact that the client was actually paying for the space was neither here nor there. So I would urge people who are in any form of freelance role to bear in mind that you have really strong skills that you can offer up to the PR industry. And it's not just about stuff that would appear in a media outlet. It's also about blogging. It's about thought leadership, which is a real growing sphere of PR. It's about helping other organizations share their own expertise on a regional and national level, which helps to build their brand. But actually, some of the stuff you end up talking about is fascinating.
Yes, David, let me bring you in here because Matt's talked about, and Susan, finding those niches, finding the outlet for your journalist skills. The people that might need them don't know you're there, perhaps. So what advice can you give on networking, on finding those opportunities for the overlap of skill?
Well, I think a large amount of this is working out really what you can do regardless of who it is you're talking about. So this comes back to understanding your own skills. And then to be a writer, I think you've also got to do an awful lot of reading. And it's getting involved with the people who are doing interesting things, who maybe haven't discovered you yet, and contacting them about what you can do to help them. I think a lot of people think that when you're freelancing, what you've got to do is you've got to talk about yourself as being brilliant. And I don't think that's true. I think what you really need to do is to listen to what other people are going to need from you and have self-confidence that you might be able to help them. I always say that in networking, what you're really doing is listening hard to what other people are saying so that you can make their world a better place. And it always sounds slightly kind of overblown to say you're making someone else's world a better place. But if they're going to pay you money, they're only going to give you money because you're going to make their world a better place. So it's a way of seeing yourself through what other people might benefit from if they were to work with you. And I know a lot of people feel very awkward about talking about themselves. And I think the good news is you don't really have to talk about yourself. What you have to do is to lay out what your skills are and what you can do. And some people will react well to that as long as you've got a very clear message. And the good news is journalists are quite good at clear messages, at least they should be. So once people have understood what it is that you might be able to do, very often they will say, oh, that's interesting. And tell me a little bit more about how you can help me because we're doing this. And if you listen carefully, then people will actually start to lean into you rather than feel that you're sort of trying to back them up against a wall. And a lot of that is to think a little bit about what it is you're doing that will help them. And then you've just got to get out there and meet people. Now, there's no point in hiding at home. The phone won't ring. You've got to contact people and say, look, I'm interested in doing this sort of thing. I've noticed that you do this in your organization or your publication. I'm just wondering if you'd thought of doing it that way rather than this way, because that's something I can help you with. But you've got to do your research.
Let's move on to another question. Sue Thomas is curious about specialisms. Which areas of journalism are the best ones to specialize in right now? to get freelance work? Who wants to go first on that one? I mean, perhaps you, Susan, seeing as you've got a broad grasp of what's going on
Yeah,
out there right now? Well,
I
you all have,
think,
but
yeah, I think specialisms is interesting. If you feel that you're knowledgeable about a particular topic, you're going to be able to contribute and sell your ideas with more, hate the word, passion. Because if you know a lot about something, you'll come across as having something to say. Editors will be attracted to your ideas. Whereas if you try to do a bit of everything, it'll sound sometimes a bit factual, a bit cold, and you need that. You can be your own case study, for example, in your story. Journalists are often asking me, how do I find a case study to illustrate my story? Because I've done this and I've done that. And I tell them to turn it round, that the story is the issue and you are a case study within your own story. So I think in terms of specialisms, go with the thing you are most interested in doing. And the way to do that in terms of what people are wanting at the moment is, and it's a strange thing, I think the papers and magazines are reassuring people. They're trying to create an atmosphere of nurture so that when the readers read things, they feel comforted. I mean, we all feel absolutely awful. So the best thing to do is think of stories that will leave the reader feeling good about themselves. So positive sort of stories. I mean, if it's travel, then focus on the staycations in the UK, although the travel supplements this weekend have been full of every place under the sun. I think editors have decided that we might as well fantasize, you know. But I think the issue with freelancing and choosing a subject is to go for something you really care about.
Matt or David? I mean, Matt, you must have a sense of what's biting at the moment. You know, where are the areas that you're finding the work is coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I've got mixed views on this. So you know, I was, as you will know, I was a specialist correspondent in various subjects in education and in health and the arts. And so you, of course, you build up a base knowledge in these fields. If I think about this from my personal business perspective now, one of the things that irritates the hell out of me is that I will pitch for a contract. Let's say it's with a scientific company, and they're like, so what, you know, we want 3 examples of work you've done in our particular sector in the last 3 years. Unless you do that sort of work all the time, that's just impossible. And because what do? They get the same old people. They never get any fresh thinking or insight into what they're doing. So my advice to freelancers who are thinking about specializing: don't block off other opportunities by trying to specialize in something that's so specialized that there's only a certain number of places you can take that skill. So you might want to specialize in more than one thing. It is possible to do that. So it's about being pragmatic about how much work is there actually in this thing that I want to specialize in.
David, anything to add?
I think you've got to be flexible. And I think if you're starting out on freelancing, you might have a view as to where you're headed in terms of your specialism and your skills, but you've got to be really, really open to taking a sort of sharp left turn, particularly if something comes along and you think, well, hang on a minute, I hadn't thought of that, but actually I might be able to do that as well. I think that flexibility has to be there. But I agree with Matt completely that it isn't about saying, you know, that you can only do one thing, and it also isn't about saying that you can do everything. I mean, one of the big mistakes is that sometimes when people are freelancing, they're so desperate to get some money in. If someone says, "What do you do?" the answer is almost, "I'll do whatever you want me to do." You know? And there's a certain desperation which can come through. And I think actually people who are going to give you work, if you're freelancing, your clients need to feel that they're in the sort of safe hands of someone who has some self-confidence that they know what they're talking about in a certain area, and they need to see that that certain area is something they're interested in. And that doesn't mean to say you're an expert in everything. In fact, if you were, that probably would make it very difficult for them to work out how you might be able to help them out anyway.
Okay. Let's have a little question about those that are wanting to grow the work that they're doing. One question from Sharia Alam. How can I grow my news business and media question, isn't it? But David, you started your own business. How did you grow yours?
I was patient and flexible. And the story I have, in fact, it overlaps with another question slightly, which I've just noticed in the chat box, where someone's asked about what happens if you move into a certain area where you're giving advice to businesses when traditionally you might have been a news journalist. So my background was BBC journalism in the BBC World Service. And when I left, I was going to set up a training business. And what I thought I was setting up was a training business doing media training. And indeed, I have always done that. But what I discovered was that there are an awful lot of people doing that. And that some of them had been on the telly in the UK, and I'd been on the radio all around the world. And so nobody in this country knew who the hell I was. I realized that I needed to be much more focused in what I was offering. So the first thing I did was decided I was not going to focus on any area. I was going to focus on international charities and NGOs. If I'm going to do media training, I thought I'm going to focus on the people who know what the World Service is, because then they'll think, oh, here's someone who we kind of get. So that's where I started out. But within 6 months, I realized I couldn't make a living doing that on its own. And at that point, suddenly, a lot of people were made redundant in the industry. And I realized that I could actually help with business skills and networking skills training. And that actually has ended up being about 2/3 of what I do. So I still do media training, but the answer is I had to be flexible. It was a question of saying, okay, I know where I'm going today. I have an idea of what my plan is for today. So you have to have a plan, but you also have to be really prepared to change your plan as you go along. So you can have your plan on any given day, but if you learn new stuff, your plan changes.
I would imagine, I mean, you tell me, Susan or Matt, but now, is a challenging time to be thinking about growing a business, although clearly there are some that will be growing. Others are closing down, furloughing staff. There's one question tonight from someone who said all their freelance commissions have been cancelled. Is it conceivable that a freelance journalist could be growing their business right now?
Yeah, go on, Sue. I'll go after you, Sue. Go off, you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you think about your freelance life as a business, that's the first step, because a lot of freelancers don't consider themselves to be a business. And I think that's probably the best thing to do, is to think, right, I'm a business, so therefore what do I need to do to, whatever your goal is, earn more, get more published. And if you set it out like that, you can think to yourself, okay, I know how to do this, I know how to do that, but I'm not so hot on this and I'm not so hot on that. So during this time of petrified sort of stationary activity, I think it's a good time to start upskilling, to start thinking about courses online that you can do to just add something else to your bow. And so I do think that if you do consider yourself as a business, which you should, that this is a very prolific time of growth that you could be utilizing to enable you, when times get a little bit better, to improve your situation. And it might be a short-term investment, in as much as at the moment you may not be earning what you're used to. And I know that for a huge number of people, it's absolutely impossible to manage, but it might be the time to sort of take on something else which isn't directly connected to journalism, to tide you over while you make your position better, while you develop your website, whether you learn video skills, all sorts of things you can do. And actually, it's quite exciting doing those things. The downside, of course, is that you panic that the money isn't coming in. The problem is the money isn't coming in. And so my thought on that is, what are your options? We can spend the next 2 or 3 months worrying about the money not coming in, or we can say, I'm just going to have to accept this. I'm going to have to find some other sort of income for a short period of time. I'm going to have to perhaps invest, and it needn't be expensive, in upskilling, or be very proactive and leap into areas that you're not that familiar with, but that your skills will take you there naturally. You just hadn't thought about using those skills. I've got students at the moment who are being very proactive. One of them on a course last night said that he met somebody online, he was chatting to them, and he mentioned that he was a journalist. And they said, oh, that's so interesting. And then he found himself, because I'd suggested that he was proactive, he found himself asking that person, well, you know, what do you do in your business and how do you achieve things? And by the end of the conversation, he'd secured himself a quarterly newsletter and an interview with the CEO. And he had sold that interview to the CEO within a week, the interview of the CEO within a week. So be open, be flexible, as David says, and listen hard to what's going on, listen hard to what people want, and then think, well, actually, I could do that. It's outside my comfort zone, but I'll give it a go. So there's my answer to that, really.
Can I just add something about this idea of being a business, which I go really big on, and I 100% agree with what Susan's just talked about there. And I think there are a number of reasons why thinking that you are a business and realizing that you are a one-person business can be really helpful as a frame of mind. Because there are, for example, a business is going to be a business even when it's not earning money. So a shop in the high street is a business. If you walk in and you have a look around and then you walk out and don't buy anything, it's still a business. It's still there. And I think if you have the mindset of the fact that you are like a business, what you can also do is realize that you can build up the business and build up the skills, even if the money isn't coming in. And I think that's worth really emphasizing, because a lot of people I meet think that unless they're earning money, they're not a freelancer. Well, that's not true. You are yourself and you are your skills and you're running this freelance business, even if it's a day when you're not earning money, but maybe investing money in, say, skills development. The other thing it helps you do is it helps you not take it personally when you don't get a commission or a bit of work. The way I deal with my work, I run a very small training business, and I'm pretty well nearly always the only person who's doing training for it. So some people could describe me as a freelance trainer, but actually I don't describe myself like that at all. I say I run a small training business, and the mentality I have is that when I'm working like I am now, but also when I'm doing my paperwork or I'm trying to get a new client, I'm actually working on behalf of my business. And what that means is that if I'm looking for work and that particular client doesn't want to take me on, I think, well, my business wasn't right for them on that day, but there are plenty of other people out there for who it is right. I've just got to keep on looking. And it stops me taking it as a personal slight, because I could take that very personally. I could say, well, that person's insulting me because they're not giving me work. But that's not the mentality I have. And I find that I also can switch off from my business very easily, knowing that my business is what I work on some parts of the day, and then other parts of the day, I'm doing something else, whether that's, tidying the garden or visiting my parents, or I have a life, and my business doesn't dominate my life. It's the other way around.
Wow, this is good. Go on.
I can add to that, which is that it sort of reminded me when David was saying that, is that when you don't get the commission, or you've pitched the story and the editor either doesn't reply or says no thank you, what happens if you're not a business is you take it personally and you say, oh, I'm rubbish, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to sell anything again, it was a lousy idea, when actually what you don't realize is there's a hell of a lot going on behind the scenes, and it's probably got absolutely nothing to do with you, why the story was rejected. So if you think of yourself as or think of it as editors buy ideas, they don't buy people, leave yourself out of the equation, so that if something that you put forward doesn't sell, it's just an idea. You've got hundreds of those. You've always had hundreds of those. So the next one will, but don't relate it to yourself and feel bad about it. It's the same for everyone. We're all in the same boat.
I like this. Does it work for things like, my wife business? My husband's not interested in my wife business. I'm not going to take it seriously. Matt, you were going to come in earlier on with a little bit of advice just before David came in. Come on.
Interestingly, I think we're very much all singing from the same song sheet here. This business approach has to be the way to go. The first thing to say is there's absolutely no reason why you can't start out as a freelance now or try to grow now. If you can survive now in the most challenging conditions imaginable, think how you're going to fly later on. So that's one good thing to think about. The second, the only thing I'd like to add, I think, to the points, all the really brilliant points have been made about having this business head on, is if you're going to divide up your 40 hours of working time across the week, there's a pretty substantial chunk of that that should be thinking about the business, not actually writing copy for clients. So, and you need to think about particularly how you sell yourself. It's marketing, and we're Brits, we're not very good at boasting about what we do, but you're going to need to think about how you're active on social media and presenting yourself. One of the things I did very early on, I actually offered to do some jobs for people for very low rates in return for testimonials. And therefore, I built up a library of really nice client testimonials very quickly, which I could then use to market myself to get further work. So that's something to consider too. So it's not just all about doing the activity that brings the money in. There's much more to selling yourself than that. And it's probably a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split, something like that.
Yes. I was once asked, in fact, my wife, talking of wives, Fran, my wife asked me how hard I'd have to work when I left employment, because I'd been full-time employee. And I did some calculations, and I came back to her with a real glint in my eye saying, I've worked it out, actually, because of the rates that I'm likely to be able to earn. I only have to work on 3 days a week. And she said, why didn't you do this earlier? And then about a week later, I went back rather sort of crestfallen and said, look, sorry, I actually got that wrong. I've just worked it out. I need to work 5 days a week, but I need to earn on 3 days a week. And two days of the week need to be running the business, if you like, investing in the skills or running it in terms of contacting people. And the other thing that freelancers often misjudge is how long it takes to get work because of the networking process. Someone who might want to work with you might say, I'd love to work with you now, but actually what they mean is there's no work at the moment, but keep in touch. And the longest I've come across, and I don't want to frighten people with this if you're just starting out, but the longest example I come across was a 10-year gap between someone meeting somebody and then getting work with them. But in that period, they kept in touch. So when we talk about networking, we're not talking about meeting someone and they say, oh, thank you for coming into my life. Here's a bit of work for you. That's not what it is. It's actually about the long term. And you're running it like a business in the sense that you've got to maintain and build relationships. That's what networking is really about. And keeping that hoop spinning over time is the way it works.
And can I just add to that, because we haven't mentioned social media, but and quite a few of the questions have put, don't tell me about Twitter, as if it's a sort of thing that we all know about. It's not something you will know about necessarily, because Twitter is the most powerful tool for you to be out there to, I hate the word promote, because you're not supposed to promote yourself as such. But if you're writing a blog, you post it on Twitter to show your expertise in a particular subject. If an editor is talking, you don't pitch to the editor directly on Twitter, but you engage with the editor on Twitter. You can be spending, especially in this time that we're in at the moment, so much time on social media, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook to some extent, creating a profile, creating a persona, creating some expertise that will make people want to come to you for stuff. And I really think Twitter is an enormous resource that perhaps a lot of journalists may not use as best as they could to promote themselves, their ideas, their work, their possibilities. And I would encourage people to really find out a little bit more about how Twitter can work for them. And some of the courses I run or work with individuals, people afterwards say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. I've now got some work. One of my students last week saw a post on Twitter, which was about some Dutch activists going to rescue refugees by plane. And he immediately replied to the person who tweeted and said, this is amazing. I'm a journalist. Tell me more about it. And they said, okay, what do you want to know? He said, I'd like to join your mission to rescue the refugees. And they said, okay, if you can get to Rotterdam Airport by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you can come with us. And he got to Rotterdam Airport at 9 o'clock the next morning. Okay, the mission didn't go terribly well, but he sold 3 stories on the back of the attempt to rescue refugees. So
Yeah.
Twitter was a tool for him. He reacted immediately. He wasn't a well-known journalist. In fact, he was on my course and he'd barely been published. But he said, well, Susan told me to react, so I did. And off he went and he got his stories.
Excellent.
Can
Go
I just,
on, David, because go on.
I won't keep you. Just to, just to say,
You can.
all social media is a communication tool where people hang out together, and therefore you need to hang out where the people are that you need to engage with, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. I mean, some people who are journalists, particularly if they've been in a big organization, are incredibly snippy about LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is where I get work from, and that's how I maintain relationships. And you don't use social media as a broadcasting tool necessarily. You use it as a research tool, and you use it to link with the right people who have the same kinds of interests that you think you might have. So you're much more specific than just using it as a blunderbuss. And if you can get that right, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you're talking about networking, you have to hang out where other people with like-minded interests are hanging out. And if they're hanging out on Facebook groups, you have to have a Facebook account, even if it's only for that.
Yeah. Matt, how do you find new clients in an era where we can't go out and have those after dinner, after work drinks and go to the openings of envelopes?
The social media point is a really powerful one. We get a lot of our work just by being active, particularly on LinkedIn, because we're in the business to business environment, and just by sharing our expertise. And also speaking. I do a fair bit of speaking at business events, which instantly establishes you as the expert in the room. Do formal tenders, but actually a big chunk of our work just comes by word of mouth. It's about the reputation build up over time. It's the recommendations, and there's nothing more gratifying than being contacted by someone you've never heard of who says you've been recommended to me by whoever. That's wonderful. Now that doesn't happen overnight. Let's be realistic about this, but you can get to that point very quickly. It's about being able to identify when you've done really good work, make sure that you're making other people aware of that really good work, and nothing also wrong sometimes in actually asking whether it's a commissioning editor or a business client and actually saying to them, look, if you're really happy with what I've done, not only will you give me a testimonial, but have you got any really useful contacts you could recommend me to? The chances are, if you've done good work for them, they'll be very happy to do that. So the contacts you have are everything. And I always say, now that I'm very much working with a business hat on rather than as a journalist, parallels between working as a journalist and being in business are remarkable. You get a sniff of a story, you research it, you chase it, you reach out to someone, you win their confidence, and eventually you get them to open up to you and you seal the deal. And it's exactly the same when you're chasing a client.
That's great. Thank you.
Use the skills you've got.
Yeah, this is great stuff from you three. Thanks so much. There's an interesting question. I hear this quite a lot actually from folks who have had experiences like Conrad. He says, how do you avoid the theft of ideas? So you're going in, you're pitching your idea for a story. They say, yeah, no, it's not for us right now. And then you see your own story being covered, within the next few days, and it's come from you. Same thing with job interviews. You give them your big ideas, they don't hire you, they use them. Is there anything you can do about that, or do you just have to suck it up? Go on, Susan.
Yes. I don't believe the people who say that someone has stolen their story, that they had more than a title. In other words, what editors steal are generic titles that maybe 60% of journalists will be thinking at the same time anyway. What happens if you send a pitch which has, I would say, up to 70% of the content of the story that you intend to cover, most of it unique to you? There is no way that an editor can steal your story. You have the contacts, you have the facts, you give a few of them, but not all of them. And which editor has got someone sitting on their left saying, oh, run with this story. It's about sort of, you know, embryo freezing and whatever. Do you have all those facts? The only person that's got the facts is the person who pitched the story. And as like it as not, as I said before, they're a case study within their story. I've had journalists come to my classes and say things like, exactly as you've just said, oh, it was awful. I pitched a story and the editor did it that weekend. And I said, what was the story? And I'm not mocking this. This is just saying it in a slightly trivialized way. And the journalist said to me, well, I suggested that they did 6 ideas for under 5s at half term. And I said, what bit of that story is unique to you? And I'm only saying that to illustrate that if you do a pitch that is good, that is thoroughly researched, that has contacts and quotes or experts in there that the editor hasn't got themselves. And if the response from the editor is, oh, I didn't know that, only you can do that story. But if the editor reads the pitch and they say, yeah, I know that, anyone can write it. So this is where you've got to be unique and very carefully craft your pitch so that it's yours and yours alone.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose you can choose how much detail you give.
Enough for the editor to make a decision.
Yeah.
Enough to reassure the editor. I call it the 3 whys. Why you are the best person to write the story, why they, in your mind, have the right readers for your story, and why now is the best time to pitch it. And nobody else can do those 3 whys in the same way. It's not possible. So, you know, those stories become unique to you and often do get commissioned, if not by the first editor, by, well, it could be the 14th, but you've got to keep trying.
Thank you.
Fran, I'll add a little bit to that.
Yes,
That's all good advice from Susan, but it is sometimes quite, if it's the actual idea, the creative idea, which is the real killer selling point, I think there is a risk that it will be pinched. I've had this myself when I've been pitching for work. You know, sometimes clients ask for ideas about how you're going to help them, and you have to come up with some ideas. The trick is just not to give away too much. You've got to somehow hold something back. You've got to be really street smart with this stuff, so you're not giving too much away, and you're not actually handing them to them on a platter, so they can go away and do it without you. But I do think there is always a risk in this. There are some unscrupulous people out there. I mean, I see the comment from Alistair in the chat about you know, having a whole series of ideas for a magazine launch being pinched. I sympathise with you, Alistair, because I know there are some unscrupulous people for me, and I've learned the hard way that when I'm engaging with someone that I really want to do business with, I don't give them too much. So
but if an editor, for example, I hear Alistair's question as well, asks for the potential of your becoming an editor on a new launch, there is no other way for the editor to see who is going to be the best person to launch this new product or magazine, unless the person is going to demonstrate their abilities. So you have to take some of those risks sometimes. I hear what he's saying, and it's absolutely, you know, ghastly that someone should produce a magazine which was all of your ideas. But I still would like to add your stamp to it, which nobody else could do except you. And I hear that it is difficult to do that. I know it's difficult to do that. But certainly in terms of new magazine launches, you have to pitch for business. And everybody recognizes that.
There's a question from Sally along a similar vein in a way. She wants to know how you can stop the restrictive terms being placed on freelancers. The example she gives, many publications like the Mirror will only pay on publication. Future is asking for all rights and are not paying if they syndicate your work. She says the unions seem uninterested in supporting freelancers, and for most it's a lonely battle with the result of losing business. So is there anything you can do?
Yeah, I think there is. Can I pitch in on that one again?
Yes, please, Susan.
I'm
yeah.
getting excited about all of this, I can see. Okay, so if you were to write your article and the magazine buys all rights, syndicates it, uses it for its sister publications and whatever else, You're fighting a losing battle if you try to change that at the moment. It's just one of the things that's happening. However, let's come back to the story. If it was your idea and you developed it and you got quotes within it from case studies or experts and you've got facts and figures, what they're buying is a photographic image of the story that they printed from top to bottom. Turn it round, shake it up about, turn it on its head and rewrite it. It's your idea. Put a few new quotes in there, change the facts, change the perspective, change your audience, and you can get a lot of mileage out of the same story. Yes, it would be lovely if we got money for big publishers using that story, but unfortunately we could fight, we've all fought. We've fought for 40 years about this sort of thing. It doesn't really make much difference. Keep the idea as your own, repurpose it, even repurpose it and think about it in a year's time with a new topical hook on it. Try not to be too precious about these things. They're big, we're small, do the best you can.
Yeah, so be more courageous then. Think, no, this is a good idea. I'm just going to refashion it, renose it, and off it goes again.
Absolutely
Yeah,
right.
really good. Yeah. Okay, now there's a question from, I think it's Lonai. I've been working on my blog. I have an account on social media. I've done lots of work, BBC, Channel 4, Western Mail newspaper. I'm a Wales Award winner in 2017, but I'm still struggling to get a fixed job. And even though I've moved from Wales to London for 9 months, it's very hard. I'm desperate. What can I do?
Oh, that's really hard. I think that I go back to something I touched upon earlier. If you've got all that fantastic work under your belt, Lonai, then think about the people you know. That has to be the place to start. Reach out to the people you already have established contacts with. Ask them if they can recommend you to others, if they can do an introduction to others. Seek those testimonials, because that's how I started when I first went out into the PR business. That's how I got started. I just contacted the people I knew, and maybe 90% of them came to nothing, but a few of them did lead directly to paid work because they were prepared to do me a favor because they knew me, thought I was sort of okay, and then that just got me started. And I dare I say it, I think moving from Wales to London probably hasn't helped you because you're sort of severing those that you might have made. So don't be frightened to go back to your roots and look for the people you really have good relationships with. I think that would be the place to start.
Also, geographical distance might not be such a problem if you're working online and if people are actually networking online anyway. I mean, Lonai, you have my sympathies. I can see that's a hard situation that you're in, but I wouldn't give up. It feels to me like you also might need to try to get to know some people who are not necessarily people who will give you work, but are people like you. I always, when people say, and it comes back to the pricing thing as well, I always say, form a group of people who are like a support network for you, who are doing what you do. Don't think you're alone, and join a union, or find places that do free training, and use the training as a way of meeting new people. Which is funny because I'm looking at all the names on the screen because I've got it in gallery view, and hi everybody who I've met before. Because I recognize some of these names. It's lovely to see you again. But I think try to make those personal contacts, because it's personal contacts that ultimately is what networking is all about, and that's what can support you, especially if you're having a difficult time. It can be really, not just support in terms of getting work. It can be emotional support from people who understand what it's like to be a freelance journalist.
And I'd like to say to Lonai, really best of luck. And I'm not clear from what she's written how she's looking for work, whether it's applying for jobs or asking particular organizations, publishers or whatever for work, or coming up with project ideas that somebody might like to employ you to do. So there's three sort of different aspects of looking for work, and only one of them is answering ads. So I'm not clear from Lonai's post whether or what she's doing to find that work. And it's a long answer. because as a career coach, obviously I'm working with individuals about their topics and what they're interested in doing, and everything from, do you want to work remotely? Do you want to sit in an office? Do you want to be part of a team? Do you want to lead? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? There's so many aspects to the work that you might be looking for. It's very difficult to see just, you're struggling to get a fixed job. I need to know what you're struggling to find and then set you off on a path to search for it rather than it coming to you. So that would be my answer. It's out there. Don't worry about it. You will get it, but you might need to articulate it in a clearer way to yourself, perhaps.
One way of doing that is also to sit down, perhaps with someone who you trust, who's very patient and can also hear you talking about your work, and get them to ask you questions about what it is you've really enjoyed in some of your work before, just about the way you've done it and what you've done, and get them also then to write down the kinds of impression they're getting from you and where your enthusiasm is coming in. Because if they're doing that, it's almost like then becomes a mirror to yourself. And it can really help you to work out what you really value in the work that you do, either in the people you work with or the kinds of work you do. And ultimately, that's really important, especially if you end up freelancing or if that's what you're doing, because you end up realizing that some people you just don't want to work for because they don't tick the right boxes. And you start to become then quite selective. And I know it sounds a weird thing to say, but any freelancer needs to get quite good at turning work down gracefully when it's not the right kind of work. And that's all part of understanding who you are, so that you can make sure that you don't corner yourself in getting the wrong kind of work as well.
We are running out of time, but I think we'll just cover one final thing. And you mentioned the move to London and how that can sometimes not always be the way forward. There's a question about the impact of COVID being felt maybe more in other parts of the country versus London. This is from Fiona. She wants to know, should someone currently a long way from London be looking to approach employers who are not used to using freelancers from more rural parts? How should they do that? So say work is scarce. We're all now used to working from home. Our location isn't so key, perhaps, in how we're relating to each other. Could this COVID thing mean that actually, if you're not in London, you have greater access to work? Is that going to be a benefit or not? Can you maybe end with some encouragement about the fact that perhaps COVID and home working has actually opened up more opportunities for freelancers? I got there in the end.
Well, my view is yes, absolutely. There are opportunities. People's mindsets have changed massively over the last 6 months. And remote working is no longer seen as a barrier. It shouldn't have been before anyway, but the technology is definitely there. It's about you having the right skill set, is it not, and the right ideas. It doesn't matter where you're based. Apart from, there's one other crucial thing as well, which is probably more relevant to me in PR than it is actually in journalism, is that people in London charge a heck of a lot of money. And being based outside London is a competitive advantage for me because I just don't charge the same rates. So that's something to think about too. So I don't think it should be seen as a barrier at all. In some ways, it can be a real advantage.
I think it's actually in many ways, for some people, it's made it easier to get access to certain markets rather than harder, because it's been a great leveler in a horrible way. It's been a real leveler. But I also have met people who found that they have got to know people across the UK in a way which they never otherwise would have been able to do, because they've met up at support groups like this, you know, and engaged with people in a way they never could do before. So and finally, on that point, it's shaken things up. The industry's been shaken up, and of course that brings a lot of anxiety. But any industry that gets shaken up, people can make their opportunities out of. And I think that's where we all have to be. We all have to be thinking, okay, people need our skills. People who need our skills are also anxious that they won't necessarily find them. Let's try and make that easy, and then we can find work.
And I'd like to add that remote is fine, and remote is brilliant. I mean, what has actually happened is that remote has enabled so many people who would have gone for jobs that involved 4 days in the office or 2 days in the office and don't get them because they live anywhere and everywhere. And that doesn't mean just in the UK. And what remote means is that you can go for things that you would never have considered going for before. And I must sort of just comment on Matt's point that if you live outside of London, perhaps your rates are lower. As a journalist, not as a PR, never undersell yourself. It doesn't matter if you're in a shed in Scotland.
Yeah.
You should be charging exactly the same or getting paid exactly the same as if you've got a plush office in Mayfair.
Research the market rate. Yeah.
Market rate, don't undersell yourself, never work for nothing. And this is just some sort of space in a horrible storm that we have to weather, and build on your skills, increase your resilience, get out there, network, find more people like you, and you'll look back and just say, well, actually, that was a growth time for me. And without this enforced space, I wouldn't have got to where I am now. So I think celebrate where you are, what you've done, and eventually where you're going.
That is such a great note to end on. I want us all to get to our feet and clap. I'm finding my clap button in the Zoom reactions. Thank you so much, panelists. That has been great. Thank you to Matt Udell, David Thomas and Susan Grossman for giving their time to us tonight. And I hope you found that inspiring. And most of all, thanks to the Journalist Charity putting this event on. So as a reminder to you, do check out their website. Have a look at what they could do for you. Keep connecting in, be aware of more events like this. And we have recorded the session and you'll find that on the Journalist Charity website. And I believe you might be getting it through the Eventbrite systems as well. So huge thanks to the three of you. Thank you to everyone else for joining. And thanks from me. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.